Hello, everyone. Today we're in the Old Testament book of Judges. We're in chapter 6, and we're just reading verses 1 through 32 today. So far, we've worked our way through 4 of the judges that appear in this book. In chapter 3, we met the first 3. Othniel, who reigned over Israel for 40 years, followed by Ehud, who is over the people of Israel for 80 years. Snuck in there with just one verse is a man named Shamgar, who apparently rose up and served as a judge before Ehud's death. And then after Ehud's death, we meet Deborah. And Deborah ends up being a judge for 40 years. That now brings us to the 5th judge, Gideon. Gideon is going to represent a number of things to us, but one is going to be a break in the pattern. Remember, the pattern has been simply this, that the people of Israel do what is evil in God's sight. Then God gets angry with them and allows them to be oppressed by whatever nation it is they've chosen to serve. And then the people of Israel cry out for help, and God raises up a judge from within the people of Israel to set them free. And then when that judge dies, inevitably they revert back to their bad habits and choices, and they find the cycle beginning all over again. There's going to be a slight modification to that cycle this time. So as you pick up in verse 1, you'll see again, the people of Israel did what was evil in God's sight. And so God allows them to be taken hostage, or rather reigned over by the people of Midian and the Midianites. And apparently it's particularly bad. The people eventually cry out for God as they normally do. And this time, the angel of the Lord comes and finds the man Gideon. Gideon is hiding and trying to make a living at the same time. And the angel of the Lord says, you are the one that we're choosing to bring the people out of Israel. And Gideon pushes back, says, listen, I am the smallest guy in the smallest clan of this overall tribe. And so you got to have this wrong. But the angel of the Lord insists, no, you are the right guy. Gideon does something interesting at verse 17. He says this, Gideon replied, if you are truly going to help me, show me a sign to prove that it is really the Lord speaking to me. What I like about that particular verse is that as we read on, the angel of the Lord indeed does establish his identity. Now, God is not to be tested when we're using that test as an excuse to be disobedient. But in this case, Gideon genuinely wasn't sure. Is this really God talking to me, or is there something else going on? And God is okay with honest doubt. And I think that's an important lesson, an important step for us to be self-aware, is that when we have doubts in our hearts and in our minds, God is willing to talk to us about that stuff. He's willing to meet us where we're at so that we can move forward, so long as that doubt is honest. In this case, it was. So, having passed the test, so to speak, Gideon accepts the responsibility, and then the Lord gives him this instruction at verse 25. That night, the Lord said to Gideon, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old. Pull down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole standing beside it. Then build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary. Lay the stones carefully. Sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar, using as fuel the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down. All right, so Gideon, rather than leading a rebellion against the Midianites, is first going to do a series of acts that challenge the people of Israel for their direct disobedience to God. God is sending a message to the people of Israel that says, this is how you got here. You got here by worshiping a false God. And so Gideon is not only going to destroy this altar to Baal, which is apparently his father's altar, he's going to chop down the Asherah pole and use the wood of the Asherah pole to fuel the fire for a burnt sacrifice to God. That's sending a message right there. Now, as you keep reading, you're going to see that the people of the village want to know who's responsible for this, because, hey, if they're worshiping Baal, then clearly this is a bad thing, and we need to see to it that the person is punished. It turns out that Gideon's father, whose name is Joash, must not actually be fully on board with this whole Baal and Asherah worship thing anyway. And so he defends his son by saying this. This is in verse 31, about 3/4 of the way through. He says, "If Baal truly is a god, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down his altar." Well, we know that he's a false god. He doesn't exist. And sure enough, Gideon ends up continuing to serve God as a judge. There's a couple of things I want to point out as we stop here at verse 32. We're going to get to learn more about Gideon over the course of the next few chapters. And right now we get the sense that Gideon is a pretty good guy. He's following God's direction, and that's a good thing. His name, though, is going to be kind of a hint to us. The name Gideon literally means hacker. And that could mean because he was the one that chopped down or hacked down the Asherah pole. And that's pretty cool. But in English, the word hacker has a couple of different meanings. It could be somebody who has outsmarted a system, somebody who's hacked the system to make things work to their advantage. And that's a positive definition of the word hacker. But when we describe somebody as a hack, that means that they are halfway there. They're not actually good, or there's something wrong with them fundamentally. And guess what? We're going to discover that to be true of Gideon as we read on into the next chapter. And this is the problem that we all get to face, is that sometimes when we're listening to God and being obedient to him, things are good. But the people of Israel, and we as individuals too, sometimes lose focus on where God is. So the advice for us today is to listen to how the pattern has been changed. And when we recognize a pattern in our lives of us finding ourselves in struggles and having to reach out to God, maybe we need to look at ourselves first and accept the challenge that says, hey, we, the people of Israel, are doing something wrong, and that's what got us here in the first place. Then, when God's rescue comes, it'll be that much more meaningful as we have a chance then to break the pattern. But we also see in Gideon an example that the pattern may indeed persist, which means we desperately need to keep our eyes fixed on our God. So my prayer for all of us is that as we recognize the recurring sin and brokenness in our own lives, that we would recognize it and seek God's forgiveness, and then actively heal or pray for healing so that we can break the pattern and stay true to our God, because that's his desire for us, to just constantly love us. If we can accept that love, we'll be transformed by it. Have a great day, everyone. If these devotional videos are helpful to you, subscribe to our channel and click the notification button so you know when we post a new video. And of course, please share them with others.